Welcome back to Noble Theory Podcast. We want to make sure we give you guys a shout out because the support you've given us so far has been fantastic.
Thanks,
and we
everybody.
very much appreciate it.
Cool.
Remember to like and subscribe if you find this content valuable. Today's topic is going to be something maybe a little bit more controversial than even Donald Trump assassination attempts. We are going to be talking about tipping.
How tipping?
Let's hope not. So how are we to tip in our daily lives? Where does tipping come from? The history of tipping? We've got a lot to talk about.
Well, how did it get to where it is the first question you want to ask yourself. Like all of a sudden tipping has become this, I mean, it's part and parcel.
Ubiquitous. I get to use that word. I saw it recently.
Yeah, you probably heard me say it. It is everywhere, and it's become the expectation of tipping now for things that just a few years ago there was no expectation for tipping.
Yeah,
I think a lot of people think it's kind of out of control, and it really starts with the pandemic. That's really where it got down into the fabric of everyday interaction between customer and merchant, or restaurant or deli or coffee shop, and it really comes down to, during the pandemic there was a lot of sympathy, right? There was public sentiments where these businesses are closing, and everybody was watching big businesses, small businesses suffering. I mean, society was in essence closed in many big and small towns across the country.
It felt bad.
Yeah, we did too. And I know you had opportunities to, sort of in a quiet, sort of, stoic fashion, hand a merchant, somebody, whether you're giving it to the business owner who was a lot of times working the counter because they couldn't afford staff because they weren't making any money. So anyway, and now it's sort of become there's this expectation that is sort of off-putting, and they keep raising the allowable,
ratcheting it up,
right? They're ratcheting up the times and places and frequency that you can ask for a tip,
and some of it's technological, isn't it?
Well, of course, right. That's a great point. As we move more towards cashless, which is cashless society, which is a whole nother podcast, which does marginalize lower or people below the poverty line. They can't afford bank accounts. They need cash. They operate on cash. The world needs cash. Besides the fact that some people think that being cashless, a merchant being cashless is illegal, that you must in fact accept cash. Story for another day. That's also butted up against crime, and they want to have no money in the restaurant, so nobody can stick a gun in your face and take your money. Sorry, you were going to say.
Well, I was going to say technology in the sense that your phone now, you can pre-tip when you make orders.
Yeah.
Technology in the sense that there's now a flippable screen, and that flippable screen seems to put the onus on the signer of the bill to leave a tip. In fact, it's usually front and center. There you go.
Well, everyone's standing around you watching this whole transaction. And
it becomes a public display. That hinge makes it a public display.
Yeah, right. And then stepping back a half a step for 1 second on that concept, this is sort of what the casinos invented, right? They turned money, they're chips. And you have some people have an adult beverage, they're sitting at the casino table. And if you had your hard-earned money in stacks in front of you, I think there'd be at least a little more reluctance to throw this, but they're chips. They're plastic and they have a number on them, and you're representing things and you're feeling. And so there's a little bit of that going on with this tipping thing, right? You're not handing somebody a $5 or $10 or $20 bill when you're tipping them something, or $11.67 because it's the 20%. You're hitting a button and it's off and you're done and you're waiting to get your food, and there's a line and they're standing there, and many times they're young and they're full of promise and they're being very polite and they're enthusiastic, and you want to reward that behavior.
Well, psychologists have shown for years that using credit to buy things makes people spend more than they would otherwise. If you compare the two different regimes where you've got cash to make your payment or credit, you tend to spend more with credit than you do with cash. That, coupled with that flip over sign here, enables people to receive a little bit more than they probably would have otherwise.
There was a professor at Johns Hopkins University that did a study or did some research, and this is pretty interesting. for Uber and Lyft, when riders are presented with the opportunity to leave a tip after they've been dropped off, driver's gone, relationship has ended, 60% of people don't leave tips. When you are in the car and you're prompted to leave the tip and you're still in the ride and you're still in front of the person, the driver, 5 to 10% of the people don't leave tips.
It's a big difference.
Huge, significant difference. And the only change in that equation is the face-to-face with the person that's expecting a tip.
So the physical interaction versus a non-physical
interaction. And so now you extrapolate forward the scenario we just pitched, right? You're in a fast casual restaurant. I was just going to say quickly that I think Kava and Chipotle was what I was finding out amongst obviously many companies, corporate organizations that are in that fast casual space don't allow tipping, and the way they justified that is they've either publicly or privately made people aware they have compensated their staff appropriately to incorporate the missing out on receiving these tips.
Yeah.
So they're very careful, right? Because we're upstanding corporate citizens. We treat our employees well, right? We're not taking money out of the dated hourly employees, but they don't allow tipping. And I've been to Kava. I lived in California for a while, and there's one here, and there's several in Greater Nashville, and they don't allow tipping. And the process, I have to admit, one, there isn't that pause. Like, think about if the tip transaction takes 10 seconds and you have 100 people coming through your thing in an hour, that amount of time, you're now stretching. So there's no tipping. It's moving things along. There's, the people are still pleasant. They're being compensated. Everybody wins. But the reason that the companies let the tipping happen is because it doesn't cost them as much to pay their employees. They can lean on that. Right?
Yeah. Well, it's interesting to see, though, that modern companies, restaurant chains, are flipping back to a situation where they're not tipping. All of Europe pretty much is a non-tipping zone. However, tipping arises in Europe. So it's an interesting reversal we've seen.
Though tipping, and there's some parts of Europe, if I'm not mistaken, where the tipping is almost considered, I don't want to say an insult, but it's an affront to and also tipping is much more modest. It's down in the 5-10%.
Generally in restaurants in Europe, you don't tip anymore. So they build in a service, what they call a service charge, and in the United States,
right?
In the United States, you might see a service charge, but that is built into a bill for a group that's larger, than 6 or 8 people. But in Europe, that's built in for a singleton. They come into a restaurant, they sit down, and they have a cappuccino and a croissant, and you are still given a service charge for that individual.
It would be interesting, and you couldn't really compare, as my buddy likes to say, this is oranges and cranberries, but apples and oranges. You couldn't really compare the tipping.
I think he says pomegranates.
Pomegranates. It is pomegranates. You really couldn't legitimately compare tipping and the amounts and what it's based on from Europe to the U.S. because there's a different mindset. Not to mention, the whole experience of dining in Europe is a different thing than dining in the U.S.
So in Europe, tipping arises. Well, some historians say that ancient Romans tipped. There's not a lot of historical evidence for that, but in certain cultural practices, it may have actually been there. Are we to think
that modern day man is going to go the way of the ancient Roman based on tipping? Is this where we're going?
No.
Could this cause the fall of civilization?
We're going to bring forward to mid-19th century, though, and think of Downton Abbey. You have a manor house, and you have famous or notable guests come stay with you. I mean, these manor homes were essentially hotels at the time and in the country. And so when your guests came and spent a week with you, 10 days, whatever that period of time was, when they left, they would leave a gratuity. Some of them, the wealthier ones, would leave a gratuity with your staff.
Now, is it a token of appreciation, or was it an obligation, or was it?
It was not an obligation. It was a token of appreciation, but think about the reciprocity of this, right? So economists like to look at game theory when they examine human behavior, economic behavior. And one of the things a game theoretical model would examine is it a multi-period game or is it a one-shot game? And the equilibria outcome are very different for one-shot games versus a multi-period games.
Right? Yeah.
So if you were the guest of a person with a manor home and you were a person of means yourself, you would probably leave a tip at the end of your stay to your valet, maybe the housekeeping, whomever was taking care of you, because you were going to be back again, and you'd want them to give you as good of a service as you had before. So Americans, with their growing industrial revolution prosperity in the mid-19th century, were traveling to Europe, and they began to see this custom of affluent people staying in manor homes, tipping the staff.
And perhaps the benefit of the custom, which was that recognition when you return to the purveyor of said services that you, right?
That's right.
And so there's an upside to the tipping, but the whole thing has gotten, we've arrived at a point in modern day, right, where because of the pandemic, it stuck around. It was good intentions. Now it's gone. And now people are saying, and this happened to me in the airport, there was a person at the little kiosk. It was a tiny little kiosk near the gate. And I bought a bag of granola and it was time to pay. And it said tip. And I took the bag of granola off the display myself. And the thing was there, and the person just standing there watching me do this, just supervising so no one steals.
Yeah.
And then I was about to pay, and then it was a tip, and I'm like,
so what did you do? Did you take $1 out of your left pocket and put it into your right pocket?
Yeah, because I was exactly. It was pretty crazy, and I guess I don't know what the motivation there is. Is the airport, the organization, the company that has that? Are they trying to compensate? Right? Because if a certain percentage of people tip, which clearly a certain percentage do, whether it's single digits or double. This person, the question is does the business keep the money? And this is another thing I want to talk about. Does the company, the corporation keep the money, or does it actually go down to the employee?
In that situation, that's a really good point. I'm not sure. The origin, though, of the low-paid or below minimum wage employee receiving tips as the bulk or all of their tips arises in this period of mid-19th century when we have the returning Americans visiting Europe, seeing this tipping culture in the manor homes with the domestic staff. The railroads are expanding in the United States mid-19th century. And George Pullman has a company that makes really nice sleeping cars and dining cars. This is sort of hotel quality experience on wheels. And George Pullman hires folks, and he does not really pay them. They derive their income
just from
tips.
Wow.
Now, after the Civil War,
so by the way, it's an interesting idea. It wouldn't fly today because of all the minimum wage.
Well, you're essentially a contractor,
right?
Working with a firm, and you're doing your own.
I guess
gig
is that a variation on straight commission?
Yeah, it would be a pure commission.
Yeah,
that would be a
so to speak. Although a commission, there's a certain expectation of an amount for the sale.
Well, a commission is attached to some sort of revenue generation.
Sure.
And this is not directly attached to revenue generation.
The guy's not cooking the food.
No.
He's not, right.
But after the Civil War, many freed black slaves went into either crop sharing from their experience working on farms and plantations. They started doing sharecropping. Or many of them went into a hotel and restaurants and waiters and waitresses. So Pullman took advantage of that, and it allowed some people to take jobs traveling all over the country. They very much enjoyed that and so forth. But it may not have been what we consider a living wage today by today's standards. That minimum wage gets established in 1938 or right around 1938. But despite having a minimum wage, there's an exception made for...
Minimum wage based on the cost of living, correct? Is that the minimum wage? Was that...
I don't know if it was ever tied to the cost of living.
I thought there was... maybe. Anyway, you were saying...
And so there's an exception made for people who work in restaurants and hotels, people who largely receive tips as a substantial portion of their overall income. But it's interesting to see that just before that, there was a resistance movement to tipping in the United States. So tipping it was largely something that wealthy people did in the United States from, say, mid-19th century to about the turn of the century, about 1900 or so the early 20th century. And there began to be a movement, notably the daughter of J.P. Morgan. She founded a restaurant with some of her friends on top of a hotel. Was it a hotel or some tall building, relatively tall building in New York City? She had a restaurant on the top of it, and the restaurant was designed to provide moderately priced meals, but no tipping was allowed. There was a movement.
Are you saying this is basically the first one of this business model?
No, I don't think it was the first business model, but it was a notable.
Yeah.
People knew about it.
Right.
So she was one of the people leading the anti-tipping movement that was taking hold at that point. They felt that it was un-American to tip, that it put people in servitude, and that servitude was not a good place to be. Given the sort of the slavery background of the United States.
Which is funny because there are people in servitude today that make a couple $100 a night in tips. It's not such a bad place to be.
Well, depends on the restaurant, but they can do very well.
Yeah, and by the way, so jumping from that J.P. Morgan business model to today, so you wonder why some of these businesses don't
go back.
Well, they don't push back on all the outcry from you and I and from the rest of us. The customers that we're all grumbling. Everyone's grumbling all the time. It's all over social media. And
it's going exponential, right? So instead of just the hospitality environment, now it's gone to your point, you're at a kiosk to buy a granola pack and you're asked to leave a tip.
Well, but I think the reason that, and this is not necessarily a good thing, I think the reason that these businesses, corporations don't push back on the public outcry, you and I complaining quietly, is because it benefits their employees. The job market, everybody knows that those entry-level jobs, it's really hard to find. I don't know whether it's Gen Zers or what the deal is, but we can't get enough entry-level hourly people and that capacity. So this is one of the incentives, right? Hey, we're Wendy's, we're paying $12 an hour, and you get tips.
Yeah.
At the drive-through and right? Because I think there's a tip thing. I don't know, maybe not. At Wendy's, certainly some of the fast food.
Oh, you see it at Starbucks. There's always a tip jar, tip cup.
Right.
But I want to spend a moment though and talk about the mechanics of tipping. Usually, tipping in the United States is based on some percentage of the bill, right? And this is mostly restaurants, the context of restaurants. But
you're going to get into how flawed the current system sort of.
I am.
Yeah.
So even if you're a proponent of giving tips, and I tip people, but the mechanism by which we tip is based on the percentage of the overall cost, and I want to explore that a little bit. For instance, let's take a look at a restaurant, a fine dining restaurant. There's somebody there constantly giving you more butter or replenishing the butter.
Filling your water.
The water, every time you take a sip,
right?
You get a refill.
This is the good service. This is really good.
The fine dining service. The little crumb scrapers comes by and they
clearing
scrape
the plates
crumbs.
as you. Yeah.
The forks are changed out, and so forth. And this is nice. It's an enjoyable environment to be in. And so this is a high-end restaurant, let's say. Now, if I bought something, let's say I had a house Cabernet Sauvignon. So let's call it $15 for a glass. Or I have an expensive Bordeaux, French
Are you going to handle all the emails from the wine snobs and are you going to pick on your models of the wine, the prices?
Yeah, that's fine. That's fine.
Go ahead.
So we've got a glass of Cabernet, of a house Cabernet, and we've got a glass of French Bordeaux. $45 for the French Bordeaux, $15 for the Cabernet, house Cabernet. If we say we're going to give a tip based on a percent, they brought you, whomever brought the
Guy
wine.
Didn't squish the grapes.
Guy's not squishing the grapes coming. It's one person bringing you a glass of wine.
Yeah.
Why are you tipping at 20%, $3 for the less expensive glass versus
here's the question:
spending $9 on the tip for the more expensive glass.
Here's a question: do you think? I don't think so, and I don't think you will either. But I'll ask it. Do we think it's possibly based on the fact that somebody who's buying a $45 glass of wine can afford that higher elevated? Is there any?
But now,
you get the question?
I do get the question, and so that's kind of a willingness to pay. A lot of economic models use income, household income, or say zip code income to derive certain prices. Well,
which is smart.
It could be. It could be. In this case, this is why a car dealer asks you, where do you live? One of the first things they ask you, what town do you live in? What city are you in? Because if you live in a high-end town, an affluent town, they know that they're going to charge you a different price.
And not that side of the lot.
Yeah, exactly right. So, or the extent to which the negotiation is going to drive the price down or not. So in this case, you're tipping because of service, right? Hospitality service. You're not tipping the waiter or waitress because of the cost of the inputs. Mm-hmm. For them, their work, their effort is the handing of one glass. In essence, it's versus the same
effort.
Glass.
It's the same effort. It's the same service bringing the $45 glass of wine as it is to bring the $15.
And you have a $3 tip versus a $9 tip.
Yeah.
Well, why is that? We wouldn't want to do that, right? We would want to tip based on, so if we had a tractable, if we wanted to do this in a way that kind of makes sense, that is somehow related to the amount of effort that is expended by the waiter or waitress, you'd want to do it in a per unit capacity. So a per unit of work. So how would we measure that per unit of work? Maybe by the number of glasses or the number of plates, rather than the cost of the content of the glass or the content of the plate.
I think you have aptly pointed out that the current system, the amortization of the way that's calculated, right, of the tip and the tips is flawed. I think the fallback and the response to that would be, and I'm not saying I necessarily agree, but I kind of do agree, is that it's the simplicity of it. You got a bulk number, you take a number from that, and you keep rolling. If we get into, think about this. You want a tip for you brought out 7 plates. Sir, I actually brought out 9 plates. No, I only brought out 7.
Yeah.
You only brought out 7. You're not counting the butter plate. Right.
But doesn't that happen all the time anyway when the prices aren't quite what you expected? In other words,
a very high percentage of restaurant bills are incorrect, by the way.
That's right. And so if you go through them, then you'll notice that.
It's already happening.
So what I'm saying though is you had 3 glasses of wine, right?
Up to 3. After 3, you probably lose track.
You won't after the 3. Right. But if you had 3 glasses of wine, maybe you give $1 per glass per execution of a service.
By the way, can't we make the analogy like on a rusty nail? You have to pick wine. It makes us seem like such teetotalers.
Okay. How about this? We'll do a plate of food.
I'm kidding.
You have a $10 plate of the food. And now again, holding constant the level of service in the restaurant.
Sure.
You have a plate of food that's $10 versus a plate of food that's $50. They bring you one plate. We want to look at the container as the mechanism by which to tip a per unit basis, rather than the expense or the cost of the contents on the plate. The restaurant itself, the provider of those contents, is charging you a price that they think is suitable, that they're going to actually earn a profit each time they sell it to you, and you pay for that, and you've agreed to that. How about the service part of it, though?
Well, and actually more to your point, you're saying, $10 and $50. A lot of food, you get steak and lobster, it's $100.
That's
$120.
Right. That's right.
So there can be a $10 entree or $12.
If you're looking at a percentage,
I mean, it could be really
20% on $100 is $20 versus 20% on $10, which is $2.
Yes.
The amount of effort cannot be 10 times greater.
Right. No, it's a fair point. I think it is. It does fall back to the simplicity of it. It is really pretty flawed.
Now there's another flaw. This is a little bit different. This is more of a psychological flaw. So we've all been in a situation where we really got along with our waitress or our waiter or whomever. We just like them. We like their personality. They're charming, whatever. We have a little conversation with them. And we end up giving them a tip greater than we would otherwise,
had we not had that experience
for the service.
Sure.
So say we would normally give, and I'm just going to use kind of a fabricated number here just to sort of isolate the problem. you would pay $3 for a tip normally. You come to this restaurant 10 times and you're going to give $3 for the plate of fries that you got in your Coke. But today you've got somebody that you really like, and now you're going to leave $5. Well, you're paying a $2 extra above what you normally would have given for the same food to this person because you like them. But then you have to ask, when I go to the office, Monday through Friday, and I talk to Sally or Bill or whomever, and I really like their conversations, I really enjoy talking to them, do I just give them $2 because they talk to me and I enjoy their conversation?
You might. I'm just kidding. It's a good point. It's a really funny point. It sounds kind of outlandish, but it's actually...
You're giving... It's a charisma.
It's a performance, though.
It's a performance. You're not giving actually for the service. You're giving for the performance in a way that you don't normally give for performances. And what I'm saying is, well, somebody could say, well, yeah, but you liked your waiter. Why not give them more? But when you talk to Sally or Bill at the office or wherever, you don't hand $2 to them because of the quality of the conversation you
It would be
give.
funny to give Sally or Bill $2.
It would be. And maybe Sally or Bill would say, oh, thanks.
Thanks for the great conversation.
Yeah.
So bringing it back to today, how did we get here and how did we get out of this? Where's this going? What is going to happen? Because the pushback, see, the irony here is that if you complain to the management of a restaurant about the tipping thing, one, you're probably the only person that day to do that. Not because other people don't feel the same way you feel, but because people don't take it to that. They don't escalate it to the point of, hey, excuse me, as a manager, why do you guys keep flipping the screen around and making me feel guilty about it? Okay. So my point is that I don't see it in the short run or even in the medium.
How do you correct it?
But I don't even see what that correction is. I mean, unless a company slowly dials it down.
But so we all have within us some innate sense of direction on the right thing to do. And what do I mean by that?
Sure.
When you go to
voice inside your head, right?
When you go to the doctor, does the voice inside your head say, I just visited the doctor and I'm going to pull out a $5 and hand him the $5? He provided service.
Right. And he was nice.
Do I hand the doctor $5?
Yeah. It's odd.
They're a service provider. Yeah. Do I hand the nurse $5?
More importantly, does the doctor flip the screen around at the end of the exam and say, hey, check Blue Cross Blue Shield, and when you're tipping them out, and they do that, they look away, they don't want to see you.
When you're flying, you took that flight recently. When you're flying, do you stuff a $20 bill into the pocket or the...
The only reason you don't is because there's no opportunity to. I wouldn't be surprised
if people do that.
Yeah.
How about the pilot? Is it important to have your pilot like you?
Yeah.
So do you knock on the bolted door and say, hey, I'm going to slide this 20 underneath. Thank you for such a good job.
Right.
So we know innately that there are certain contexts where even though a person's providing service, we do not tip.
Well, there's another thing quickly too about the psychology of a tip jar. So you have the jar sitting there and there's money in it. I've often gone to you go to some sort of private event where there's a screening or some kind of music performance and there's a little bar and there's somebody making drinks. And I will say to the person, hey, you put your tip jar out. And they're like, oh, we're not allowed. I'm like, well, you tell the management I did. And I put the cup out and I put $5 in it and try to get it going for the person. And they're kind of like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
Because the psychology, the power of that suggestion, but it's on your terms.
Yeah.
I'm going to put $1. I'm going to put nothing. I'm going to put, or this guy's cool, and he's going to see me do this, and there's that moment.
Yeah, but you
and there's also the cash of it.
But you run the risk though of looking crass or looking inappropriate, and
that wouldn't be the first time that's happened.
Me either. Think back to Caddyshack.
Well, let's do a podcast on Caddyshack.
We will. By the way, we will do some film reviews, and especially
we have 1 minute. So
what happens? Rodney Dangerfield's working the room at a country club, and he's stuffing $20 bills down everybody's
pockets. Then he makes it rain. He's the original guy to make it rain to the band. Take some music lessons.
Take some music lessons, to the band. Right? But he's perceived as being in this country club environment where you're not supposed to tip that way, as being crass, right? So there is...
You're extrapolating from my example that there's a level of that.
Yes, I think it's getting kind of crazy. And this movement, I don't know if I mentioned this, but between, say, 1900, when this movement to stop tipping took place, until about the end of the 1920s, many states banned tipping. They prohibited tipping. Now, what they found was that people were doing it anyway, and so they ended up repealing most of those bans. But I think at one point, 40 states had bans in place on tipping.
Here, I think where the rubber meets the road from this whole conversation is that tipping, this is where the great divide is, in my humble opinion, that tipping it used to be on our terms, the terms of the consumer, at our discretion, at our, from zero to whatever, at our own, we were in control of the moment. When the screen is flipped around for somebody handing you your burrito, and they're standing there waiting for you after you've transacted the payment, and they're waiting for you to decide what their tip is, you're stuck, A, with the obligation, B, the people behind you looking, C, why? Was there something wrong with the way I greeted you? Why did you give me no tip? Not really based, so it's no longer on our terms. It's really on their terms. Hey, hello, you're being nudged electronically.
Well, the electronics, we're going back to technology, the fact that you can tip prior to picking up your food, you pay for it and tip because you've done it through an app. Does it really make sense to go into a walk-up, pick-up food environment and tip? All they're doing is the people in the kitchen made the food, and the people working the cash register, they're doing their job. They're providing, they're being paid.
Tableside service is really
different. Yeah, tableside service is different.
And I don't think anybody's contesting that.
Yeah,
I think this.
My only issue there is the means in which, or the mechanism by which we tip, percentage versus, say, per unit of work, per unit of service. But nobody's doing anything service related, hospitality related when you go to a pickup window and pick your food up.
It's
you
awkward.
Go to a Chinese restaurant.
Awkward.
You go to the Chinese restaurant and you get your food and you take your food and you leave, right? Or you pay for it there. You could pay for it, make sure it's all correct, because it could be wrong. They could have gotten your order wrong. You sign your credit card bill, you pay the cash, and you walk away. There is no extra service or hospitality provided.
It's all lost in it's now just become this obligation. And I've always wanted to say this, and I've never got to say it in my whole adult life. I'll give you the last word.
My last word is thank you again for watching. We really appreciate all the attention you've been giving us, and we hope to continue to make interesting content for you. Please like and subscribe. Thank you.
Send us some comments. We'll respond. Appreciate it, everybody.
Thanks. You very much.
See you next time.